Silence. A machine hissed in the living room, keeping him alive while the rest of the world had already moved on. My parents weren't there. They were in the Maldives posting photos with cocktails and captions about paradise. I stood in the doorway, uniform still dusty, realizing the man who once taught me what honor meant was dying alone. Hours later, after I made the hardest choice of my life, my phone lit up with 127 missed calls and a message from my father. "We need you. Answer immediately." But by then, everything had already changed. I'm Jericho Blaze. I lived this, and I want to share it with you. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say, "listening" in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if my story touches you, please subscribe to this channel. Every voice, every listener reminds me I'm not alone in carrying the weight of what happened. Your support keeps these stories alive. The tires crunched against the dirt road as I turned up the hill, the last streaks of a Montana sunset bleeding crimson through the pines. Dust clung to my boots the moment I stepped out. The air smelled of resin and earth, the kind of sharp scent I remembered from summers long before Afghanistan hardened me. The porch light was dead. The front door, once the threshold of safety, gave way without a key. Inside, silence pressed against me like a weight broken only by a faint rhythmic beeping that echoed down the hall. I followed it. The living room was no longer a living room. It had been transformed into a sick bay, an adjustable hospital bed, oxygen tubing monitors humming steadily. The curtains, yellow flowers my grandmother had sewn decades ago, hung limp with dust. And there on the bed lay my grandfather, Walt. His frame was frail skin, pale against the white sheets, eyelids trembling as if fighting for the strength to open. "Grandpa, it's me," I whispered, brushing sweat from his forehead, tucking the blanket tighter around his shoulders. Jericho's home. His chest rose and fell with the machine's rhythm, and though his eyes stayed shut, the pattern of his breathing shifted almost as if some part of him recognized me. I searched the room. A half-empty water jug sat at the bedside table, the cup still warm, but neglected. Pill containers stacked neatly, though the logbook showed doses skipped. No nurse had signed off for days. I reached for my phone, scrolling habitually, and there it was, a new Instagram post from my parents, Lawrence and Cassandra. They smiled wide on the deck of a yacht in the Maldives, cocktails raised to the sun, hashtags littered with Qley's paradise and Qley's living or best life. I stared at the glow of the screen against the shadowed room. My presence at the side of this bed felt louder than any caption they could craft oceans away. My eyes drifted to the shelves. On the mantel rested a weathered wooden box. I knew what was inside: my grandmother's folded burial flag tucked with a slip of paper in her handwriting. "Don't bury it again." On the table, a photograph of her in her nurse's uniform, gaze steady as if daring me to falter. Behind the shelf, the dust broke in a neat line, edges revealing the outline of something hidden and embedded safe. Her voice echoed in memory. "If they aren't here when he needs them, Jericho, you'll know what to do. Open the safe." I made coffee, the bitter scent filling the kitchen as I forced my body to stay awake. I pulled a chair next to Walt's bed, set alarms on my phone for medication cycles, and sat in vigil. This was what presence meant, choosing to bear witness. Yet shadows pressed closer. A crooked wedding photo hung on the wall, and when I straightened it, I found a folded note taped behind the frame. I didn't open it. Not yet. Under my grandmother's old medical notebook, a phrase caught my eye, scrawled quick claws of 12 hours. The night deepened. I finally pushed at the bookshelf, its hinges groaning and metal glinted. The safe weighted, its keypad worn from decades of use. My military service number fit without hesitation. The click of tumblers unlocking sent a jolt through me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A private number. I answered. Silence. Then the line cut. It happened again, twice more. Someone knew I was back. On the machine by Walt's bed, a maintenance tag peeled from the tubing. Scheduled service missed 2 weeks in a row. Neglect or something worse. The safe's lock gave way with a metallic snap. My hand reached to lift the door, but I stopped. I turned instead to adjust my grandfather's mask, watching his chest rise. He came first. The secrets inside the safe could wait until morning. By dawn, fatigue had painted my eyes with shadows, but my resolve was sharper than ever. I pulled the safe door open. Dust billowed, releasing the scent of old paper and iron. Inside lay a thick envelope labeled in my grandmother's hand, "Jericho Blaze, our pride." My throat tightened at the sight. Beneath it, a legal document sealed and stamped, a small USB drive marked M1, and a slip of paper with a phone number, Everett Cole. I opened the letter first. Her words were direct, unwavering. "Don't let them shake you. They chose beaches and cocktails. You chose the bedside. That is all the court needs to know." My hands trembled as I read on. "Find someone worthy of the flag. Don't bury it again." The will was more ruthless than I expected. It named me sole heir under strict conditions. If my parents failed to be present within 12 hours of either grandparent's incapacitation, they forfeited everything. A no-contest clause barred challenges. Anyone who sued lost all rights. And the most pressing, the 12-hour clause. Within 12 hours of triggering the will, I had to notify the executor, provide medical proof of Walt's condition, and act in alignment with his advance directive. If I failed, the estate defaulted to creditors. My chest tightened. This wasn't inheritance. It was a call to arms. At the bottom of the stack was an overdue tax notice, corners frayed. Clipped behind it, a record of a second mortgage my parents had taken out less than a year earlier, secured against the very house I stood in. If the will didn't activate in time, the bank could seize it all. My parents hadn't just abandoned my grandfather, they had gambled away the ground he lay on. I plugged in the USB drive. The screen flickered, and there she was. Marjorie Grayson. Her voice clear, her nurse's uniform crisp. "If you're watching this, it means Lawrence and Cassandra have failed us. Jericho, you are the only one who stood present. Honor means nothing if it isn't lived." Then her gaze shifted hard. "This inheritance is not a gift. It's a duty. You must make the decisions your grandfather cannot according to his wishes. Do not hesitate. Honor him by acting." I shut the laptop, the words cutting deeper than any battlefield order. To claim this legacy, I couldn't just stand watch. I had to decide the moment of his peace. I dialed the number. A steady baritone answered after 2 rings. "This is Everett Cole. My grandmother told me to call," I said. A long silence then. "If you're calling Jericho, it means the others have failed. I'll need proof. Time-stamped evidence of their absence. Medical verification that Walt has been in critical condition 72 hours or longer. Fax me the documents before noon. You have 12 hours, no margin." I looked at the clock. 11 hours and 52 minutes. I gathered my phone, snapping shots of the Instagram post with metadata intact, photos of skipped entries in the medicine log and the tag on the machine. Every detail became ammunition. My plan was clear: get to Bitterroot Hospital, fax the paperwork, secure medical certification, and lock the clause into law. Yet inside, war raged. I was a soldier trained to act fast, to obey without doubt, but I was also a grandson watching the man who raised me fade with each breath. To follow the clause meant honoring his directive, ending the machines when the time came. Was that justice or betrayal? The countdown ticked loud in my skull. On the USB, her final words replayed in memory. "Find someone worthy of the flag. Don't bury it again." In the back of my mind, I recalled her mention of a friend at Fort Harrison who would know. The thread stretched toward a future I hadn't yet seen. I packed the envelope, USB, and the will into my bag, snapping a photo of the safe's contents before sealing it again. The house still smelled of dust and medicine. I paused at my grandfather's side, brushing his hair back once more. "Hold on, Grandpa. I'll make this right." By the time the first light crept over the ridge, I was already heading down the road, the weight of the papers against my back, the 12-hour clock counting down with every step. I reached the hospital just as the automatic doors breathed open for the day. The lobby smelled like disinfectant and coffee that had been burned on a warmer since 4 a.m. I went straight to the administrative office, slid my military ID across the desk, and placed the envelope from the safe beside it. The clerk was a woman with silver hair and careful hands. She looked from the seal on the will to my name, then back to my face, taking in the fatigue stamped under my eyes. I told her I needed to register a family care action, that time mattered, that there was an executor waiting for confirmation. She ushered me into a side room with a fax, a scanner, and a computer that hummed like it belonged to another decade. I opened the envelope and laid everything out in a neat row. The will with its stamped pages, the copy of my grandmother's directive, the USB, and the letter that still carried a whiff of her perfume under the old paper smell. The clerk scanned my ID, watched me sign a release, and read the introductory paragraph of the will with brows pinched together. When I said there was a video, she said she could only view it on a hospital terminal and log it as supplemental evidence. I plugged in the USB. My grandmother appeared on screen, posture, straight voice, even the date and time burned into the bottom corner, and a witness placard visible in the frame. The clerk took notes as my grandmother said with plain calm that if my parents were absent during incapacitation, their rights were revoked, and that any legal challenge would void what remained for them. The clerk wrote the phrase "no contest" into a form and underlined it twice. Then she turned the screen back to me so I could close the file myself. We began the fax. I watched each page feed through will letter photocopies of the medicine log, photographs of missed entries, screenshots of my parents' post with metadata intact. The machine spit out a confirmation strip with a timestamp and a case number. I texted the image to Everett and my phone lit instantly. Received. Case opened. Obtain medical summary confirming continuous critical condition 4 days or more and lack of family sign-off over past week. You have until noon. I checked the wall clock. The second hand seemed to move louder than it should. The clerk called the nursing station. A young doctor came with an overnighter's pallor and listened as I explained the situation. He pulled the chart and confirmed what I already knew from the house: congestive heart failure, oxygen dependence, shallow reserves. He printed a condensed medical summary while I stood in that narrow windowless room and felt the countdown scrape across the back of my neck. The summary used the precise language Everett had asked for: critical status for more than 4 days. No documented family presence, no signatures from next of kin since the last week began. It was clinical, dry, and devastating. The clerk stamped every page, then initialed the time in blue ink. I slid the receipt strip and the summary into the envelope, and for the first time since I'd arrived in Montana, I felt like something objective had been placed between me and whatever storm was coming. When I stepped into the hallway, I almost collided with a woman in scrubs carrying a stack of volunteer forms. She apologized with a tired smile. Her badge read, "Mira Tate Volunteer." She glanced at the name on my summary, then looked up at me. "You're with Mr. Grayson." I nodded, startled, and she let out a breath like she'd been holding it all night. She told me she'd covered 3 evenings this week, had checked the contact numbers on file twice, and never reached anyone. The numbers rang until they stopped. She had left notes, signed the log, and asked a staff nurse to escalate when no one came. She wasn't dramatic about it. She gave me the facts like someone passing a baton in a race. "If you need me to say that in writing," she added, "I will." I did. She signed a brief statement with her shift times and the calls she placed, then printed her name slow and deliberate as if each letter could be called to testify. Back in the office, the clerk flipped through the will one more time and frowned at a gap. "Do you have the advance directive?" she asked. I slid my grandmother's letter across. She unfolded the paper, and there it was on the reverse. My grandfather's wishes in plain clauses: no prolonged artificial support, comfort prioritized, allow natural passing when recovery isn't possible, signed by his unsteady hand. There was coffee dried into the crease where my grandmother must have set her mug years ago. It lacked one thing: the hospital seal. "We need the attending physician to sign concurrence," the clerk said gently. "Then we can formalize a shift to comfort care when you're ready. Without that signature, it's incomplete." The doctor returned, skimmed the directive, and nodded like he was making peace with something he'd had to do before. He signed the concurrence, dated it, and looked at me. "If you choose to proceed, comfort care will mean stopping measures that don't improve outcome and focusing on ease." It's consistent with what he wrote. My mouth was dry. I nodded but asked for one more step. "I'll sign what I need to sign," I said, "but I want to see him before anything is enacted." He understood and told the clerk to prepare the forms for a delayed execution, authorized, now carried out only after my confirmation. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A notification from my mother's account bloomed across the screen, a helicopter skimming a blue ribbon of water, a caption about chasing manta rays, and a line that felt like it had been aimed across the ocean at my chest. "Don't let people take advantage of your kindness." The image glowed exotic and distant under fluorescent hospital lights. I realized they knew something was happening. They would posture as if they were being used, as if presence was optional, and love looked the same whether delivered in person or from a first-class lounge. I signed the authorization for comfort care with a scheduled hold, wrote my initials in the margin, where the nurse pointed, and tucked the fresh stack into the envelope. I pressed my thumb against the fax receipt, the ink still slightly wet. It marked the hours I had left. Mira walked me to the exit. As we passed the sliding doors, she said almost as an afterthought that her grandfather had been a ranger buried at Fort Harrison, and that if I ever needed someone to help me with flag protocol, she knew people who would show up in a heartbeat. "Sometimes that's what we owe each other," she said. To show up. The late morning air hit my face like a wake-up. I checked my phone again, a message from Everett, concise and bracing. "Your filing is live in the system. Expect calls. Keep your responses minimal. Presence is your argument." I shoved the phone in my pocket and crossed the parking lot. That was when the ping hit my home app, an alert from the living room, a spike in sound levels near the bed at an odd interval. The graph looked like a cough that wouldn't settle. I didn't think. I ran for the truck, the envelope pressed against my ribs like a second heartbeat, the road to the house already mapping itself under my tires. By the time the pines opened to the clearing, the sun had shifted just enough to turn the dust into gold. I killed the engine, left the door hanging open, and took the porch steps 2 at a time. Inside, the living room hummed with an artificial calm that didn't belong to the human body. My grandfather's chest rose in shallow pulls, the monitors beeping, pacing the thin air between us. I set the envelope on the end table and put my palm against his sternum. A short shudder ran through him, a tremor that made his hand twitch under the blanket. The monitor showed a drooping line of numbers. I called the on-call number from the hospital packet and told them I needed a home visit, told them I had the directive, told them I had already signed. The nurse said the doctor was en route and to keep my grandfather comfortable. I pulled the chair to the side of the bed and began talking. Not to fill space, just to bring him back to a place we both knew. I told him about the first time he taught me to fold a flag properly in the yard, how he'd insisted on clean angles and corners sharp as a salute. I told him about the sand that gets into everything, even inside sealed pockets, and how the quiet after a firefight can feel heavier than the noise. I told him I was here. That word mattered more than any other. The backdoor sensor chirped. I froze, checked the app, and toggled the camera. The frame caught a sliver of movement, a figure cutting away from the rear step head lowered under a cap I recognized from a neighbor who liked to walk at odd hours. Familiar enough to be benign, familiar enough to make me uneasy. I checked the deadbolt and slid the chain into place, not to barricade myself from the world, but to remind the world the threshold meant something. The doctor arrived with a satchel and a face that had done this before. He reviewed the directive, matched the date with the hospital concurrence, and looked to me. "If we proceed," he said quietly, "we'll discontinue supports that prolong without benefit. We'll manage discomfort. We'll let his body choose." He placed a pen on the clipboard and waited. I felt the weight of my own name. I remembered the crowded ocean blue in a photo I didn't take, a caption about kindness that missed the point, and I remembered my grandmother's voice, simple and unadorned, "Choose the bedside." I flipped the will's back page, searching for strength, and found it where she had left it for me, in a quick slanted line of ink I hadn't noticed before. "Let Walt go with honor." My throat tightened. I signed the final confirmation and handed the board back. The doctor moved with calm economy. He adjusted rates, stopped what was no longer serving a purpose, and spoke to my grandfather as if he could hear every word, which I believed he could. I took my grandfather's hand. The skin was warm, papery, familiar. His breaths became softer spaced like footsteps fading down a long hallway. I leaned close and let him hear the only thing I needed him to have as he stepped through that last doorway. "I'm here," I said. "I'm right here." His fingers shifted against mine, a small answer. And then the room settled into a stillness that wasn't empty so much as complete. The machine's display stopped dictating the terms of our time together. The doctor placed a hand on my shoulder and stepped back, giving us the dignity of a quiet room. I don't know how long I stayed seated, my hand still on his, the house holding its breath with me. Outside, a truck downshifted somewhere on the road, and a bird called from the trees, the same 3 notes in a pattern I'd heard since I was a kid. The thin strip of sunlight that had crawled across the floor reached the foot of the bed and softened. I tucked the blanket one last time the way my grandmother used to, making sure there were no drafts even though I knew he didn't feel them anymore. My phone vibrated on the table once, then again, then in a steady pulse that felt impatient and mechanical. I glanced down. Missed calls stacked one over the other until the screen filled with the same 2 names alternating with a number I recognized as their attorney's office. A new email broke through the flood, crisp and officious, asserting that any unilateral medical decisions were invalid without parental consent, that I would be held responsible for damages. The legal language dissolved in my vision. Presence wasn't something you could litigate away. It was either true or it wasn't. I responded to no one. I texted Everett a single-sentence comfort care completed per directive. He replied moments later, "I'm filing the final notice now." Breathe. Breath, I thought, staring at the quiet curve of my grandfather's profile, was exactly what we had finally given him a way out that wasn't a fight. I stood and went to the mantel. The wooden box waited with its careful corners and brass clasp. I didn't open it. Not yet. The flag would have its moment, but not before I called the funeral home my grandmother had circled in blue pen years ago and told them we were ready. I gave them the information the hospital had provided, spelled my grandfather's full name, and asked for a veteran's honor guard if one could be arranged. When I hung up, I sat again and let the silence come back and sit with me. The doctor returned from his car with the official forms and explained what came next. I initialed where he pointed, and he left me with a copy and a look I recognized from soldiers who knew when to step out of the shot. When the house was quiet again, I stood at the window and watched the trees accept the afternoon breeze. My phone pulsed once more. I picked it up and saw the number of missed calls jump to 81, each one a demand dressed up as concern. I turned the phone face down, placed it beside the envelope, and reached for the chair. I pulled it close as it would go, and leaned my forearms on the mattress. I kept my promise I said to the man who taught me salutes and patience, who taught me that honor isn't posture but practice. The house answered with its old wood settling, and if there was any sound beyond that, it was only the wind moving through the pines like the low, steady breath of a country that has seen a lot and still stands. The storm outside could rage. In this room, for the first time in days, there was peace. The house was quiet, yet my phone screamed with its glowing screen. I had silenced it, but the number of missed calls climbed higher with every refresh: 70, then 100, then 127. Names I knew too well filled the log, alternating with the firm tone of their attorney's office. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope open in front of me, and plugged the USB into my laptop. The screen flickered, and my grandmother's face filled the frame, steady and unflinching. "Jericho is the only one who showed up," she said, looking straight into the lens. "When Lawrence and Cassandra abandoned this house, he stood where honor demanded." Her eyes sharpened. "And if they challenge this will, I want the court to see their entire financial record. Let them explain the debts they created in secret." The words hit harder than any rifle report. She had known this day would come. She had known they would fight not for Walt, but for what they believed was owed. Before I could close the file, a notification buzzed across the corner of my screen. A headline from the Bitterroot Star, copied and shared across social feeds. "Young veteran seizes family estate while parents vacation abroad." A photograph I recognized appeared beside me in uniform, saluting during a ceremony years ago, cropped and captioned to tell a story that wasn't mine. Someone had fed them the narrative, and now it was everywhere. My inbox dinged. An email from their lawyer sat in bold letters. We are requesting an immediate freeze of all assets pending judicial review. Attached a copy of the emergency filing. I opened it. The pages brimmed with accusations of undue influence, claims that I had manipulated an ailing woman into rewriting her will, demands that the estate be held in suspension until a full trial. My grandmother's video was the only shield I had, and even that they would call into question. When I left the house later that morning to buy coffee at the local shop, the owner barely met my eyes. He handed me the cup without a word, fingers trembling slightly, as if he wanted to ask but didn't dare. Outside, a neighbor I'd known since childhood leaned on his fence. "Jericho," he said carefully, "people are saying you forced your way into that will. Is that true?" His eyes searched me for a crack. I felt the weight of the community's doubt settle on my shoulders like a second rucksack. Back inside, I shut the laptop and leaned back in the chair. My grandmother's words from the letter came back. Silence is stronger than any argument. It was the opposite of everything the Army had taught me: stand tall, speak loud, command space, but here, silence might be the only weapon left. The phone rang again. I let it buzz until voicemail cut in, then another call, and another. Everett's name finally appeared across the screen. I answered. His voice was calm, firm, the voice of someone who had walked through fire before. "They'll come to you, Jericho. Don't leave that house. Make them confront their absence here, not in some office where they can spin the story. Hold your ground." As if his words had been a cue, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. I looked out the window. A rented SUV stopped at the edge of the porch. The doors opened in sync. Lawrence stepped out, first tailored shirt, despite the long flight face, red with anger. Cassandra followed, dragging 2 glossy suitcases across the dirt like they belonged in a resort lobby, not here. Their silhouettes cut across the afternoon light, and for the first time since I had returned, I felt the full storm at my doorstep. The front door burst open before I could even reach it. Lawrence's voice thundered into the living room, rattling the photographs on the walls. "You think you can steal what doesn't belong to you? Handed over this house, the accounts, everything. It's ours." Cassandra followed her heels, clicking against the worn wood floor, eyes sharp with fury. "You had no right to be here alone," she spat. "You had no right to decide anything." I rose from the chair by my grandfather's empty bed and faced them. He lay here for 4 days waiting. "Where were you?" My words came out low, but the air seemed to tighten around them. Cassandra gave a humorless laugh. "We were somewhere that mattered more than this backwater town. Don't pretend you're a savior. You're just a soldier who doesn't know when the war is over." Lawrence pulled a folded paper from his bag and slammed it onto the table. It was the article from the Bitterroot Star, printed large, the headline blaring. He jabbed a finger at the photo of me in uniform. "You're using that suit, that salute, to trick people into pity. You're nothing but a fraud who hides behind medals." I didn't move. Instead, I walked to the laptop on the side table and opened the file on the USB again. The room glowed with my grandmother's image projected against the wall. Her voice filled the air, firm and resolute. Jericho is the only one who stood present. Then her tone sharpened. "If anyone dares contest this expose, every page of their financial history." For the first time, their faces faltered. Cassandra's lips parted. Lawrence's eyes flicked to the floor. They knew what was hidden in those records: the second mortgage, the debt stacked under their names, the gamble they thought no one would uncover. From outside came murmurs. I glanced at the window. Neighbors stood clustered along the fence line, their phones raised, filming. The argument that should have stayed within bloodlines was spilling across the town. The porch boards creaked as someone stepped closer, the camera light blinking red. The whole community was watching, and suddenly I understood this wasn't private anymore. Cassandra's voice rose to cover her unease. "We'll take you to court, Jericho. We'll bury you in legal fees until you crawl back and beg. Let's see who this town believes, the parents who built a life or the son who hides behind the ghost of a will." Her words shook, but she forced them out. Lawrence threw his suitcase down in a fury. It split open, spilling papers across the floor. Among them was a folder stamped with the logo of Bitterroot Savings. The embossed letters caught the light. I bent and picked it up. Inside were statements. balances and overdue notices all bearing their signatures. Evidence they could never explain away. I felt anger pulse in my chest, hot and sharp, demanding release. But my grandmother's voice cut through again. Silence is a weapon too. I closed the folder, set it on the table, and without a word let the projection of her video play again across the wall. Jericho is the only one who understands what honor means. For a breathless moment no one spoke. They stared at her face, at her voice echoing from beyond the grave. Then Cassandra scoffed. "One video won't save you. You think that's enough? You have no idea what we can do." My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen. Everett's name lit up. I answered, and his words were quick, urgent. "The hearing is set. 3 days from now. Prepare yourself. This fight has just begun." I lowered the phone and looked out through the window. Neighbors hadn't left. They filmed openly now, eyes wide with the thrill of scandal. The story was no longer confined to paper or whispers. It was alive, spreading, and I stood in the center of it. The world outside roared. Inside, I held on to the silence. The courthouse was small, crowded, and tense. I sat with Everett at my side, my parents glaring from across the aisle. Their lawyers smirked, ready to turn the room against me. The gallery was full. Neighbors, veterans, and strangers with phones raised, streaming every word. Everett began with the video. My grandmother's face appeared, her voice unwavering. Jericho is the only one who stood present. "Lawrence, Cassandra, you abandoned your father. If you challenge this, let the court see your financial history." The silence that followed was heavy. I submitted the screenshots of my parents drinking on a yacht while my grandfather was fighting for breath. Gasps rippled through the benches. Then Mira took the stand, her voice calm. No family came that week. Only Jericho sat with him. She signed her statement without hesitation. Their lawyer pounced, waving a photocopy suggesting my grandmother once intended to divide the estate. The judge dismissed it as worthless. Everett countered with the bank records revealing the mortgage my parents had hidden, their debts piled high. The gallery erupted until the gavel cracked. Cassandra began to cry, calling herself the victim, accusing me of seeking to shame them. I steadied my voice and told the court I only want the truth. And the truth is, they weren't here. The judge leaned forward, his decision clear. The will is valid. The no contest clause applies. This petition is dismissed. Jericho Blaze is the rightful heir. The gavel struck final. My parents stormed out, faces twisted with anger, dodging the cameras waiting outside. I walked out moments later. No cheers, no applause, but veterans in the crowd gave me a quiet nod. That single gesture told me I had done what mattered, defended the honor of the people who raised me. The house changed. What had been a place of illness became a place of service. The living room filled with tables and chairs where veterans could sit, talk, and share coffee. My grandmother's study became a legal aid office where Everett volunteered. Her photograph hung above the desk, a constant reminder. On Veterans Day, I opened the doors. 42 folding chairs lined the yard, a small table between 2 framed photos of Walt and Marjorie. Beneath them, her words, "Honor is a flame that never dies." The community came, even those who once doubted me. Presence spoke louder than apologies. My parents tried one more time, planting an article that accused me of using the foundation as a cover. I didn't respond. Silence shielded me, and the community answered in my place. One evening, I found the wooden box again. Inside, the folded flag and a note, "Don't bury it again." I carried it to Fort Harrison, where Hank Malone, my grandfather's old comrade, took it with tears in his eyes. He'd be proud, he said. In another drawer, I discovered a childhood drawing, a boy holding a flag scrawled above with the words, "I'll protect you, just like you protected us." It struck me that the promise of a child had become the life of a man. The Bitterroot Star later ran a headline, "Soldier turns grief into hope." The photo showed me outside the house, now the Grayson Foundation veterans behind me, the flag catching the Montana wind. And in the cemetery, standing among the white markers, I watched Hank hold that folded flag against his chest. The air moved with a steady strength, and I understood. What I inherited wasn't just a home or money. It was a fire that began with them, and now